Sri Jairam Ramesh, friends, it is indeed a very special day for us. Just how my colleague remarked, suddenly the average age of the audience has shot down. And more importantly, I see people on the stage and speaker on the hall. So something we are doing slightly differently. I didn't expect that portion. I expected this hall will be full. Clearly shows the popularity of the young Jairam Ramesh with us. As many of you may be aware, that this public lecture is a part of a seminar which is in progress in NIAS. This is on science communication. How do you engage with the public? There have been many instances where we are not doing the right thing. And 2 years before, I used to be very concerned that the debates on nuclear energy, genetically modified food, land acquisition, there are several issues in which the dialogues were not going, in my opinion, in the right direction. I'm not saying that there should not be a dialogue. I was only saying that the dialogues were not going in the right direction. And Sri Jairam Ramesh was in the thick of the things. He was in the middle. I was on the periphery. So when we decided that we will have a public lecture to coincide with this two-day seminar on science communication, we thought the best public lecture person we could think of is Jairam Ramesh. And today he is also in a position to say what he wants to say without being worried about is it in order to say it or not. So maybe he will share some of his personal experiences which he had not shared earlier. I'm looking forward to that. As many of you are aware, he is a member of parliament representing Andhra Pradesh in the Rajya Sabha. Prior to this, he was of course holding charge as the Minister of State in the Ministry of Environment and Forests, in rural development, drinking water and sanitation, several positions he has had. He has also been in the Ministry of Commerce for some time, and Commerce and Industry for some time, Ministry of State for Power in some places some time. And he has seen the government, he has seen the country from different perspectives, and I'm sure he has also gone through many of the agonies which we think the ministers and the decision makers go through. Though I have not been a minister ever, and I don't think I will ever be a minister, but even in the department I used to face this kind of problems, that when you want to take a decision, your heart and the brain do not go together. There is always a conflict between the two, and the government says don't use your heart, use your brain. And we say, no, as an individual, I want to use my heart and not my brain. You get into a problem. And I have got into problems several times in the past, a smaller problem, much smaller than what Jairam has gone through. But these are all individual learning platforms. That's where you learn how society functions, how democracy functions, how the system can take care of the fast-changing technologies, fast-changing world. I mean, it's an unfortunate coincidence that in today's world, everything moves very fast. There is no time to find out what needs to be done, how it should be done. You cannot think. You have to react. Immediately you have to react. And sometimes it is right, sometimes it is wrong, and sometimes we don't know what is right and what is wrong. So it is the reality of today, and I hope this sharing of Jairam Ramesh's experience with us will be part of the discussions which we are having during the 2 days of seminar. At the end of it, what do you expect? We are hoping that we will have some sort of a roadmap how to strengthen this process of communication between the specialists, not necessarily scientists, the specialists and the public at large. And in a democracy, the public at large ultimately has the final say. Again, we have seen it. I have seen it in Delhi, when the Euro 2 norms were introduced, the use of diesel was introduced. These are all diesel was cut down, and these are all decisions where we went through very, very painful experiences. On one side you say this is right, this is wrong. Some side says it is not correct. Some says this is politically not correct. All sorts of things. So we will have learning experiences which we will try to capture, and hopefully we will chart out a future course how to handle such situations in a democratic environment. With these words, let me invite Sri Jairam Ramesh to present his talk.
Thank you, Professor Ramurthy. Distinguished scientists, media personalities, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I am delighted to be back here at NIAS and having had the opportunity of meeting many distinguished scientists who I had known when I was young and whom I am pleased to renew my acquaintances with, many of whom knew my father, some of whom have known me, and therefore this is a wonderful occasion for me, not just professionally, but also personally. Prabir Prakayasth, who was the last speaker in the last session, said that he would not speak in PowerPoint because power corrupts and PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. In my case, I also will not speak in PowerPoint. I've lost power, but I still have many points. So I hope you will excuse that I have also not circulated a written speech, because what's the point circulating a written speech? You can all read about it. I think it's much more interesting to engage the audience. And what I want to do is spend perhaps a half an hour or so giving you my views on the topic that I've chosen for this evening, and then open it up for questions, answers, comments, suggestions, criticisms, brickbats, and so on, and a few bouquets, I hope. I'm going to tell you 4 stories on the science-society interface, which I had to grapple with when I was Minister for Environment and Forests particularly. I'm going to tell you the story of B.T. Brinjal, which is a story of biological science colliding with society. I'm going to tell you the story of Jaitapur, which is a story of nuclear science colliding with society. I'm going to tell you the story of climate change and Himalayan glaciers, which is an instance of atmospheric science colliding with society. And then I'm going to talk about mining, Vedanta, POSCO, go, no go, where ecological science collides with society. So these are the 4 case studies that I want to take. B.T. Brinjal, Jaitapur, climate change, and mining. And at the end of it, I'm going to derive a couple of principles, a couple of lessons, which I hope would form the basis of a new dialogue. The title of my presentation is Responsible to Science, Responsive to Society. So how do we take this dialogue forward, and how do we make science more responsive to society and society more responsive, more responsible to science? This is a subject that has long fascinated me. And I just discovered in my archives a special issue of Daedalus, 1974, 40-year-old issue. And the title of the special issue is Science and Its Public, the Changing Relationship. And all the issues that we have discussed this morning have been discussed by eminent scientists, including Nobel laureates like Steven Weinberg, largely, of course, in the Western context. But the theme is pretty much the same. How do you take science to the people? How do you make people more science-friendly? And how do you make scientists more people-friendly? So 40 years later, we are discussing pretty much the same theme, albeit in the Indian context. So let me start with the first example. And I'm going to be frank, and Dr. Ramurthy knows, I have never shied from controversy even when I was in the minister. So I'm not going to be saying anything different than what I said earlier, but I may add a few comments based on the developments since these decisions were taken. BT Brinjal was the first. I took over in the minister on the 29th of May 2009, and on the 30th of May 2009, 10 TV channels landed up in my room and said, "What are you going to do about BT Brinjal?" So I said, "What is BT Brinjal? I thought we were BT Cotton. What is this BT Brinjal all about?" So I called my officers and I asked them, "Is there something on BT Brinjal going on around here?" So my officer said, "Yes, sir. We have an immediate case for commercialization of BT Brinjal. BT Brinjal, very essential for food security of our country. Those of you who don't like Bangan Bharta will have BT Bangan Bharta, I'm sure." So I was first day virtually inundated with questions on what the government is going to do on what was going to be the commercialization of India's first genetically modified food crop. Now, I was aware of the debates on BT cotton. I had written about BT cotton, I knew about BT cotton, the political debates, the economic debates, the technical debates. And I was also very sensitive to the fact that over 94% of Indian farmers had adopted BT cotton. They can't be all irrational, they can't be all wrong. And as events and analysis subsequently showed, about 20% of the increase in the yield that India has had in the last decade is attributable to the introduction of the BT varieties. And India has gone from being the third largest cotton producer in the world to being the second largest cotton producer in the world. So undoubtedly, barring Vidarbha, barring Maharashtra, where cotton is largely rain-fed, wherever you had irrigated cotton, BT cotton has been a success story. But BT Brinjal presented a completely different set of issues. For one, the civil society mobilization was far more systematic, was far more serious and far more extensive in the case of BT Brinjal than it was in the case of BT cotton. I think BT cotton was seen to be something between the seed companies and the research laboratories and the farmers, whereas BT Brinjal brought in, as Prabir said, the consumer. So there were a lot of consumer organizations, there were a lot of advocacy organizations, NGOs, environmental activists, farmers organizations, presenting a whole set of issues. And then, of course, you had the scientists who said that without BT Brinjal, Indian agriculture is doomed, and food security, as I said, is going to be dependent on BT Brinjal. So what I did something which was not liked by my colleagues in the government, but which drew praise from Shiv Vishwanathan, which was very unusual for somebody to get praise from him. I started a process of public consultations. And I had 7 public consultations in 7 different parts of the country. Chandigarh, Bhubaneswar, Kolkata, Nagpur, Bangalore, Hyderabad. 7 cities I had public consultations in which about 8,000 people participated. These were open consultations. They were organized by Kartikeya Sarabhai's Center for Environment Education. Nobody can accuse Kartikeya of being anti-science. And it was his organization that invited people, invited scientists, invited farmers, invited consumers, invited the general public. And the whole idea was just to listen to people articulating their different points of view. And these public consultations, of course, became very acrimonious because nobody was talking to each other, everybody was talking at each other. The scientists were arrogant in their certitude. Civil society was equally obnoxious in their certitude because civil society felt that they had a monopoly on social conscience and scientists believed that they had a monopoly on knowledge. So actually these public consultations didn't become a dialogue. They really became occasions in which people aired their views. Scientists said what they had to say. Activists said what they had to say. And as it so often happens, activists are far more articulate than scientists. Activists are far louder than scientists. And therefore, by and large, in each of these consultations, the message that I got was, hasten slowly. By all means, don't close the door for BT Brinjal, but don't rush into it like we rushed into BT Cotton. So this was public consultations, one way of bringing science and public together. The second route that I adopted was I wrote to 70 top scientists of the world. I called Pallav Bagla. I said, give me Bruce Alberts' email. I wrote to Bruce Alberts and I said, Professor Alberts, here is my problem. Here is the BT issue. Please tell me 60 top scientists across the world who are competent to judge what India should be doing in this area. And I got responses. Some scientists saying we should go ahead, and many scientists saying go slowly. Some scientists, of course, saying don't do it at all. So this was a second route of trying to bring science and society together, getting a much larger viewpoint from the scientific community. And the third route that I adopted was, Professor Kasturirangan mentioned this morning, I contacted the 6 scientific academies of India, and perhaps for the first time in their history, all 6 academies came on the same table and were civil and cordial with each other, which was a very rare occurrence. And all of them gave me their views on what India should be doing on BT Brinjal. Now, I had all these views in front of me. I had views which were strongly in favor, including my very good friend, Professor Paintal, who was then the Vice Chancellor of Delhi University. I had very strong views that we should commercialize BT Brinjal because that would send a signal that we are serious about biotechnology in agriculture. On the other hand, I had equally strong views from scientists, from activists, and something that you may not immediately appreciate, but very important in the Indian context, from every state government in India. Every state government in India opposing the introduction of BT Brinjal. Every state government of India. 60% of brinjal cultivation is in 3 states, West Bengal, Bihar and Orissa, opposed to BT Brinjal. Maharashtra, opposed to BT Brinjal. Madhya Pradesh, opposed to BT Brinjal. And here is the surprise of surprise. Gujarat, under the current Prime Minister, opposed to BT Brinjal, which came as a complete surprise to me. Every state gave me in writing, do not commercialize BT Brinjal. This was the dossier that I had. Now what do? What I did was, I put out a 20-page speaking order. And I put all these views in the public domain. Meenakshi Sundaram spoke about transparency. I put whatever I received, whatever letter I got, whatever view I received, I put it into the public domain, put a 20-page speaking order, and said, this is what these people have said, including Dr. Swaminathan, considered to be one of the key players of India's first Green Revolution. Dr. Swaminathan wrote to me, cautioned me, saying that India is the center for genetic diversity for brinjal. Do not tamper in this manner, go slowly. So I put all this in the public domain. And I gave a speaking order saying, let's have a moratorium on BT Brinjal till 3 conditions are fulfilled. Not an indefinite moratorium, but a very definite time-framed moratorium. Condition number 1, all states or a majority of states should be on board. Condition 2, there should be an independent regulatory mechanism. Independent regulatory mechanism. A regulatory institution. Independent, professional, which will certify that all the tests have been done. And third, there must be a reasonable degree of scientific consensus that all the tests that are required on toxicity, safety, efficacy, all this has actually been conducted. If scientists themselves are divided on this issue, I was quite surprised that some of the scientists whom I talked to, and I in fact made a visit to the National Center for Biological Sciences, and some of the scientists I met there, I went to the CCMB in Hyderabad, and some of the scientists I met there, giving me skeptical views, not hostile views, but skeptical views. So my third condition was, let the scientific community, as a community, develop a broad consensus. And if these three conditions are fulfilled, the government of the day should remove the moratorium. I went out of my way to say, this is not a moratorium on biotechnology. This is not a moratorium on genetic engineering. This is not a ban on genetic engineering. It's a limited issue of moratorium on commercialization of BT brinjal. For a variety of reasons. I don't want to go into the detailed reasons, but the reasons were well argued in this 20-page note. And one of the important reasons was brought out in one of the presentations, the fact that one company controls the bulk of the seed. And that was an important issue, which was sort of like a red flag to all of us. So on BT brinjal, to cut a long story short, a moratorium was imposed. A conditional moratorium was imposed. It was imposed on the 9th of February 2010. 4 years have passed. This moratorium continues. I left in 2011, and the expectation was that the day I left, the moratorium would be lifted. But it has not happened. Because I think there was a persuasive case for hastening slowly, which was laid out in the speaking order. There was a persuasive case for making commercialization conditional. Those conditions, unfortunately, have not been fulfilled. States continue to oppose BT brinjal. The independent regulator is not in place. And the scientific consensus continues to elude us. So the story on BT brinjal is one, I would say, of an initiative that got taken with great enthusiasm, no doubt, with great potential, no doubt, without asking the basic question, in my view, the basic fundamental question that a political animal like me will ask: is BT brinjal essential for India's food security? That question, unfortunately, never got asked. BT cotton has very persuasive strategic arguments, but those arguments fall down in the case of BT brinjal. And BT brinjal then became an exemplar of science being a solution in search of a problem. Now, let me move on quickly to Jaitapur, where we had nuclear science colliding with society. Now, I was a hero to environmentalists till Jaitapur issue came. Then I became the demon to environmentalists. Because I took the view as minister that from a climate change perspective, India cannot afford to ignore or soft pedal nuclear power. That nuclear power contributes 3.4% of our energy supply. It must go up to 10% and 20% in a reasonable time frame of 2 decades. And renewables is a romantic notion that a nation of 1.2 billion, going to be 1.7 billion by 2040, is going to meet its energy demand through renewables. Professor Banerjee showed the slide. Even today, although renewables account for something like 8% of capacity, they account for less than 2% of energy supply. And that's going to be the case for a reasonable future. So for the next 20 to 25 years, India has to be a major player in nuclear. I'm not even getting into the thorium argument, which gives an extra sort of weight to what we should be doing in nuclear. Jaitapur came. And instinctively, I wanted that Jaitapur should get the green signal. But everything went wrong on Jaitapur. Everything went wrong. Fukushima happened. And after Fukushima, the entire discourse on Jaitapur changed. Local people came to me and said they wouldn't know where Fukushima is, but they were saying Fukushima. And they were protesting against Jaitapur. Now, added to this fact was that Jaitapur was frontier, cutting-edge technology, which had not been used anywhere except Finland and perhaps China. So we were going to be the first, amongst the first countries, not the first, amongst the first countries where these 1600 megawatt units were going to be installed. And my sympathies with Probir on terms which were considered to be of such great strategic importance that only very few people knew what those terms were. We could not be completely open in Jaitapur for legitimate reasons. Part of the problem was the transparency that I could bring into BT Brinjal, I could not bring into Jaitapur because of the nature of the problem. But however, the issues that were faced were identical. The issue was the confidence in the nuclear establishment. The issue was one of safety in the wake of the world seeing what happened in Japan. The issue was the introduction of a new technology, completely new technology. And one issue that came up, and I remember discussing this with Dr. Banerjee and his colleagues, is that India had gone for 40 years on the can-do route, although the joke is the can-do became the can-don't. But, you know, the can-do route we adopted. And now we were going to go into a completely different nuclear track. Why not perfect the 700 megawatt can-do reactor and proliferate the Indian designed reactor rather than depend on somebody from outside? But these were all issues that were raised when Jaitapur became a public issue. So what to do? How to get out of it? The easiest way would have been to say, we are not going to give environmental approval to Jaitapur. That went against my education, it went against my training, it went against my instinct, it went against my head, it went against my heart, it went against everything. So what I did was, I came up with the classic Indian solution, which is attach 36 conditions to the clearance. So this was a yes, but a yes but. So the Jaitapur, if you see the Jaitapur speaking order, it's all available on the website, by the way. All this is in the public domain. It was an environmental clearance for Jaitapur, subject to 1 to 36 being fulfilled. Of course, Jaitapur now has not progressed to the extent that we expected it would progress. But I think the imposition of the conditions was one way of demonstrating from the government side, from the ministerial side, that we are sensitive to public concerns of safety, of outreach, of compensation Meenakshi Sundaram mentioned, another issue that came up in Jaitapur was compensation to be paid for farmers whose land was being acquired, fishermen who were going to be resettled. These are all issues. So these conditions epitomized our commitment to embedding the concerns of people in the clearance process. That we clear the project subject to the fulfillment of these conditions, and we created a mechanism to ensure the monitoring of these conditions is not just you take that piece of paper and you go and then you ignore what the conditions are, but you actually make periodic reporting and you have periodic audits of the extent to which these conditions were going to be fulfilled. So BT Brinjal was a case of a no, a conditional no. Jaitapur was a case of a conditional yes. Now let me turn to the third issue, which is climate change. When I came to the ministry, one of the first things I read was the Himalayan glaciers were going to be disappearing by the year 2035. And Dr. Pachauri, the chairman of the IPCC, was credited with this statement. And I said, wow, Himalayan glaciers going to disappear by 2035. That's something remarkable. Does India know that this is going to happen? So I called a couple of my scientists and I said, have you seen this report of the IPCC? They said, yes, sir, we have seen this report and we have grave doubts about it. Scientists telling me. I said, what are your doubts? Scientific or non-scientific? They said, scientific doubts. I said, why haven't you spoken up? Why haven't you communicated what you believe are your doubts? Because, very rare the scientists have doubts. So when they have a doubt, the media will definitely run to them. They said, no, sir, we couldn't because IPCC, global body, government of India. I said, look, I want India's top glacier experts to come. Let's have a round table and let's discuss the issue of Himalayan glaciers. So I got people, Dr. Kasurangan came, I got people from ISRO, and I got one old man, 75-year-old man, V.K. Raina, from the Geological Survey of India, a geologist, who has, in the course of 55 years, gone to something like 3,000 glaciers. India's Mr. Glacier. I didn't know who he was, not a PhD, but India's authority on glaciers. So I said, Mr. Raina, please give me what your views are on the glaciers. And I give you 2 months, you prepare a report for me, and I want to be educated and I want to educate my colleagues. He came out of the report. And what did the report say? This report, by the way, created a furor internationally. Furor. I got hate mail from everybody. The only man who supported me was Mr. Bagla, for which he got an award, which he didn't share with me. What did the report say? The report said that there are about 10,000 glaciers on the Indian side of the Himalayas. Number one. Number two, most glaciers are retreating. But some glaciers, like the Gangotri Glacier, are retreating at a decelerating rate. Very interesting. The Gangotri Glacier is retreating at a decelerating rate. Number three, there are some glaciers which are actually advancing. The Siachen Glacier, the famous Siachen Glacier, for example, is actually advancing. And number four, which was the most important, which was the clincher, that Himalayan glaciers are fundamentally different from Arctic glaciers because their snout, which is their lowest point, is at least 3,000 meters above sea level. And therefore, the behavior of Himalayan glaciers, a priori, cannot mirror the behavior of Arctic glaciers in response to perturbations. So we put out this report. And I stuck my neck out and I said, look, Indian science, I believe science is science. I don't believe in Western science, Indian science, Vedic science and all this. Science is science. But this is one instance where I said, Indian science, which is science done by Indian scientists, has established that Himalayan glaciers will not vanish by the year 2035. That the situation is very complex. It's a dangerous situation because the health of the glaciers is very poor. That glacier melt can adversely affect water supply, but let us not get into alarmist evangelism. And I want to give you one example of this, of how alarmist evangelism can be dangerous for India. In 1990, the United States came out with a report that methane emissions from Indian agriculture, Professor Ramurthy, you will remember this, you were in the system at that time, that methane emissions from Indian agriculture were 38 million tons per year. Alarm bells rang all over India because we can manage CO2 emissions because CO2 is, man-made, anthropomorphic. But methane derived from cattle, you can't do much about 250 million cattle. You can manage 1 billion people, but can you manage 270, 280 million cattle? So this methane and wet paddy, paddy being staple in India. So this set out alarm bells. And I must compliment Dr. Mitra, the late Dr. A.P. Mitra, who took up the challenge and he said, this measurement is wrong. He started, I think through NPL, he started a program for monitoring methane emissions in Indian agriculture. By 1994, he came out with a report which said methane emissions from Indian agriculture was 4 million tons per year, not 38 million tons per year. And today, the internationally accepted figure is 4 to 6 million tons. Had Dr. Mitra not done that giant leap of faith, we would have been under enormous pressure internationally to manage methane emissions because, as you know, from a climate change point of view, carbon dioxide may be more preponderant, but more potent is methane emissions. So it is because of Dr. Mitra. And this glacier is a similar story. We depended on somebody else's science which had not just a scientific agenda, this notion that scientists are politics free, this notion that scientists are value free. It used to be said of George Nathaniel Curzon, he is a superior person. This notion that scientists are superior persons, bereft of human emotions like politics, is a myth. Much of science in today's context is political. Much of science is used to drive political agendas, both internationally and domestically. And Himalayan glaciers was one such example, where clearly the scientific community was behaving like evangelists and not like scientists. Till a report came out of the Indian, in fact, even my Prime Minister asked me, are you sure what you're saying? I said, sir, I've consulted all the experts. This man swears by what he says, and I'm prepared to back him 100% to the hilt. The day we released the report, Dr. Pachauri put out a press release calling it voodoo science. NGOs burned by effigies in Copenhagen. To cut a long story short, subsequent events proved Mr. Raina right. IPCC for the first time issued a retraction, saying they were wrong, their peer review process was wrong, was slipshod, and that what the Indian government's position is, the more nuanced position is the right position. So in the case of climate change, when science collided with the public, it was not public that was wrong, it was science that was at fault. It was science that had created this great atmosphere environment that the glaciers were endangered. And when somebody challenged that science, the truth came out differently. The point I want to make is that the scientific method is a method of questioning. The scientific method is a spirit of inquiry, the spirit of doubt. And if you're going to accept everything coming out of scientific establishments as gospel, I mean, that I think goes against the very grain of science. Dissent is part of the scientific DNA, which we tried to quell at every step. And in the case of the glaciers, if we had not allowed that small window for dissent, we would not be in the situation today where the world community recognizes the complexity of the Himalayan glaciers issue and does not get into sensationalism, fear-mongering that the Himalayan glaciers are going to disappear by the year 2035. Let me now turn to the final issue of mining, which is perhaps the most complicated, because these are not just scientific issues. These are human issues, livelihood issues, as Mr. Meenakshi Sundaram pointed out. And in the case of the mining issues, whether it is in the case of Vedanta, where bauxite was going to be mined from a mountain that is considered to be religious, I would like to ask all of you, suppose diamonds were discovered under Ram Janmabhoomi by some miracle. Would India tolerate mining in Ram Janmabhoomi? No. Because Ram Janmabhoomi is considered sacred for us. If the Niyamgiri hill is considered sacred for the Dongariya Konds, who are we to determine what is right for them? That was the issue in Vedanta. Only 5% of the total bauxite supply for that 6 million ton alumina refinery was coming from this mountain. They could have found this bauxite anywhere else. But it was the certitude. This is what we want, this is what we will get. This is jabardasti, to use a Hindi word. So in the case of Vedanta, it was a mountain that was considered sacred. It was not a scientific issue. It was an issue of faith, it was an issue of culture, it was an issue of lifestyle. But to my mind, equally important as a public issue as a scientific issue. In the case of POSCO, which Mr. Meenakshi Sundaram talked about, in which again I had the misfortune of being entangled. In the case of POSCO, it is a straightforward case of land acquisition. People were growing betel leaves. These betel leaves were going all over India. And they didn't want to part with their land. It was as simple as that. 7 villages land was to be acquired. 5 villages agreed. 2 villages did not agree. And that is how the POSCO issue came up. And this was a straightforward case of livelihoods being lost. And our track record in providing alternative livelihoods being so poor, our track record in providing R&R, resettlement and rehabilitation, so poor. I have heard it said that R&R for Tarapur is still being done. R&R for Bailadila iron ore project started 50 years ago is still not complete. R&R for Bakra Nangal is still going on. Now, in the face of this reality, what is the confidence level that anybody is going to evoke in the public when you say, I'm going to acquire your land and I'm going to give you compensation and I'm going to give you R&R? Nobody is going to believe it. And that's what's happened in POSCO. In the case of coal mining, the issue is a little more complex and it's related to ecological science. In the case of coal mining, all the coal that India needs to extract in the future is in thick, dense forest areas. So the more coal you're going to extract, the more forests you're going to destroy. You're going to destroy natural forests. You can always have artificial plantations, but you are going to be destroying hundreds of hectares, if not thousands, hundreds of hectares of high density, please mark my words, high density, good quality forests. 21% of India is under forest cover. Out of this 21%, only 2.5% is good quality forests. 40% of Indian forest cover is Naam ke Vaste forest, is degraded forest, open forest. What you really call forest is 2.5%, and that's where much of the coal mines exist. Now, if you are going to extract coal at the pace at which is being envisaged, then the country will pay a certain ecological price. Maybe the country is ready to pay that price, but the consequences of paying that price is what the public is responding to, what the public is reacting to. Lands being acquired, compensation not being paid, R&R not being completed, mines being worked, finished, and not being restored to their original condition. Not one mine in India. So these are the realities as far as mining is concerned. And in mining, I must say, the issues go much beyond science. They go into issues of legality, they go into issues of land acquisition, they go into issues of resettlement, rehabilitation, and so on and so forth. Now, from these 4 examples, BT Brinjal, Jaitapur, climate change and mining, what are the general principles that one draws? These are nice, interesting stories. And those of you who are interested, all the material on each of this is available on the website. It's all in the public domain. I have not said anything which is not in the public domain. What are the general principles that one derives? The first thing I think we must recognize that while growth is essential, there is no questioning that India must grow at 7.5 to 8% per year. Between 2004 and 2014, average GDP growth was 7.7%. Now, those of you who know your compound interest tables by heart, you know that if something is growing at 7%, it's doubling in 10 years. Which means basically a GDP growth of 7.7% over a 10-year period has meant that GDP has doubled in the last decade. Even so, there has been a slowdown in the last 2 years. And we must get back to a 8% growth trajectory on which there can be no doubt whatsoever. But in the process of getting on to this 8% growth trajectory, issues that I have highlighted will become essential to the choices that you make. This 8% growth will not be without contradictions, will not be without complexity, and will not be without conflict. I think it is the job of all of us to clarify how these contradictions, how these complexities, and how these conflicts are going to be managed. There is going to be undoubtedly choices that have to be made, investment choices have to be made, technology choices that have to be made. Those choices will involve trade-offs. What those trade-offs are will have to be made explicit, put, as Meenakshi Sundaram says, made completely transparent, and as part of the democratic process, decisions get taken. Now, what is this democratic process? This democratic process is not a government sitting with a huge mandate in Delhi. This is not a government sitting in a state capital with a huge mandate. These are locally elected bodies. Ultimately, we must recognize that if the Gram Sabhas, or Palli Sabhas as they are called in some states, are not part of the democratic process of decision making, these conflicts and these complexities and these contradictions will never get resolved. This resolution cannot be a top-down process. We are not China. I know there is great fascination for China these days. We are not a Japan. We are India, where chaos and anarchy is part of the system. And if we think that we are going to mastermind a top-down approach to managing these complexities and conflicts, we are sadly mistaken. These cannot be done in a centralized command and control mode. It has to be done by involving local communities, local elected representatives. And I venture to suggest that scientists in India, more than any country in the world, are pampered lot. Because scientists in India, from Jawaharlal Nehru's day onwards, have enjoyed unprecedented prestige, unfettered access, and the Prime Minister has always been the Karta Data of the scientific establishment. Nobody else. So the scientists have not felt the need to engage with democratic processes at the local level. With great difficulty, they are engaging at the state level. Because if anything goes wrong, you can always run to the Prime Minister, whoever the Prime Minister is. And the Prime Minister will set it right. Whether it is biotech, whether it is nuclear, whether it is space, whether it's defense, whether it's agriculture. So I think we must understand that in this process of growth generation, to meet this complexities, contradictions, and conflicts, engagement with the democratic process at the grassroots is very, very important. And that is where I think the scientific community really needs to do far greater work, irrespective of the area that we are talking about. Now, I derive 5 basic principles, and I'll stop here. I derive 5 basic principles for taking this dialogue forward. We are all here recognize the value of science. We all know that science has much to contribute to the growth process. We all know that major investments have been made in science. But we are also aware that we are operating in an environment of skepticism about science. We are operating in an environment in which there is questioning on science. We're also operating in an environment of distrust in many cases. So what is the way forward? So I would suggest the following 5 principles for adoption, both by the scientific community as a community and by civil society, loosely organized, but as spokesmen of the people's point of view, whatever that people's point of view may actually mean. But before we take these 5 principles, I think both sides have to accept that neither side has a monopoly on truth, neither side has a monopoly on patriotism, and neither side has a monopoly on social conscience. So let us assume that truth, patriotism, and social conscience is something that is common to all of us. So the first principle, science needs to be less arrogant. Society needs to be less suspicious. Dr. Banerjee, you have to be less arrogant. Shiv Vishwanathan, you have to be less suspicious. Science needs to listen. Society needs to hear. Baldev Raj ji, you have to listen. Rajendra Singh ji, आपको सुनना है. आप सुनते नहीं हैं. आप जानते हैं कि सारा माल आप ही के पास है. और जब मैं आईआईटी कानपुर से आपको प्रोफेसर से मिलवाया था, आपने मुझे कहा था ये आईआईटी वाले क्या जानेंगे. 30 साल से गंगा क्लीनिंग की बात हो रही है, 30 साल से. और जब मैंने 7 आईआईटी को पहली बार एकजुट होकर को कहा कि आप गंगा के लिए एक एक्शन प्लान तैयार कीजिए। मेरे मित्र राजेंद्र सिंह जी ने पहली बार उठकर कहा, ये साइंटिस्ट वाले क्या कहेंगे, हमसे पूछिए, हम जानते हैं गंगा को कैसे साफ करना है। तो आपको सुनना है। बलदेव राज जी, you have to listen. Rajendra Singh ji has to hear. Third, science needs to be open to skepticism. Society needs to be open to questioning. You can't question Sunita Narayan today. She is goddess when it comes to environmental issues. But you can't question Dr. Kalam also. He's God when it comes to scientific issues. So, maybe I took the wrong example of the scientist. With due respect to Dr. Kalam, science needs to be open to skepticism. Society needs to be open to questioning. The fourth principle, which is what we are discussing today, science needs to be proactive in communication, not active in communication, proactive in communication. And I'll explain what I mean by that. And society needs to be less sensationalist and conspiratorial, that Monsanto is out to enslave India, the Vandana Shivas of the world. At the same time, Pendle Saab, you have to be proactive in your communication. You cannot, when there is a crisis on BT Brinjal, start writing articles daily. Where were you? No, I'm not talking about you, please. Don't mind. Not you. Where was the biotech community? Where was the biotech community? It's only when this BT Brinjal crisis came that the community woke up. Communication cannot be crisis driven. Communication has to be constant. Communication has to be done not with a view necessarily to convince, but it has to be done with a view to educate, which necessarily takes time. So, science needs to be proactive in communication, not just active. Society needs to be less sensationalist and conspiratorial. Finally, science needs to develop trust. Society needs to nurture confidence. Dr. Banerjee, whatever you say, I'm sorry I'm picking on you, whatever you say, no activist is believing your numbers on nuclear energy. Nobody, including my friend Prabir. Nobody believes the Department of Atomic Energy on nuclear. I am your greatest champion and I have to say this. When we say 3% will go to 6%, 4,500 megawatts will go to 10,000 megawatts, they'll say, oh, we've heard this for the last 30 years. So you have to nurture, society has to nurture confidence in you. And that will come when you have trust. I find the scientific community notoriously laggard in sharing information. Notoriously laggard. And I think the more information you share, the more open you are, the more trust you will build. The more criticism you will get, no doubt. But I think you have to get out of the cocoon if you have to develop the trust amongst people. So the 5 principles, I'll just repeat it very quickly. Science needs to be less arrogant. Society needs to be less suspicious. Number 2, science needs to listen. Society needs to hear. Third, science needs to be open to skepticism. Society needs to be open to questioning. Fourth, science needs to be proactive in communication. Society needs to be less sensationalist and conspiratorial. 5, science needs to develop trust. Society needs to nurture confidence. I believe that if we follow some of these basic principles, and if we get people together on an ongoing basis, we will be able to show a dialogue forward. The great weakness in the Indian system is lack of institutional forums where people from different points of view can actually sit down and debate each other. All the time, it is the converted preaching to the converted. Most of the time. We value biodiversity, but when it comes to intellectual discussions, we make sure that there is no biodiversity. There is a monoculture. I think if you break out of this syndrome, and if you provide institutional forums, and I venture to suggest to you that these debates will become more and more significant in the years to come. There will be different points of view, some informed, some uninformed, but I think if you do not provide the space, as Shiv keeps writing about, A, you have to provide the space for different points of view, and two, you have to provide forums for reducing the differences between the two different points of view. So I would like to thank Niyaz for taking this initiative, Pallav Bagla, although he has not shared the proceeds of the award that he got on the Himalayan glaciers, to Pallav and to all the people who are here, some of whom have Mr. Paintal, in Mr. Paintal's eyes, I'm a villain. I hope that I have explained to you, you know the background, why I had to take the decision that I took. In the case of nuclear, I'm a hero to you, but because I am a hero to you, all the environmentalists think that I have sold out to you. So they are not easy choices to make. You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. But I think the real challenge is those in public life called upon to make decisions must have the intellectual honesty and the integrity to stand by these decisions, to put out these decisions in the public domain, held accountable for it, be criticized for it, be applauded for it, as the case may be, and have the courage to say that I have been wrong in some cases, that I should have done things differently. I have not yet reached that stage. So when I reach that stage, I will let you know. But I do feel that this has been a very productive exercise, and I thank Dr. Ramamurthy for this, and I hope that this is not the first in such an exercise. We will have many such interactions, and out of these interactions will come sensitization to both sides. Sensitization not just to communicators, but sensitizers to activists also, and sensitize the scientific community as well about the challenges they face in the larger public arena. So thank you very much.
Thank
Can we
you.
take some questions?
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
sure. I have no
Thank you.
no
Thank
problem.
you. And I think this is the closest view of the decision-making process in the government we could have had. And life was much simpler 50 years before. One Baba and one Nehru will decide everything and everything else is in place. But today we are evolving into a system where both the sides have to interact on a continuing basis. I'm sure you will take a few questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, Paintal Sahab. Shiv.
Well, would you like to sit here or?
No, I'll take it from you, no problem.
Okay, fine. Yes. I will go around. Yeah. Yes. Shiv.
Okay, Jairam. Brilliant. You're the perfect crowd pleaser. As a storyteller, you're brilliant, but your conclusions are absolutely trite. And I think that's the disappointment. If you look at it, each of your stories had better models than you could conclude. Sometimes maybe the storyteller isn't the best philosopher of his own story. Now let me take this thing. You seem to operate with a model of rationality, which has to be questioned, because what was really questioned in science was the rationality and the nature of knowledge itself. You have never raised that question. You seem to think whether it's P.T. Brinjal or nuclear power, they're all equivalent problems. They're not. Two, you seem to ignore the ironies of the system. Because to a certain extent, these can be zero-sum games. I mean, it's okay making fun of Sunita Narayan or Vandana Shiva, but I think what they're trying to say is your ethical position is much more complex than you make out to be. And I think there, you have to be much more complex. I think politicians, unlike scientists and activists, tend to make the world simpler than it actually is. There you have to take a certain responsibility because you're brilliant in analysis of activism and science, but you black boxed yourself. And I think that's something you'll have to answer.
No, I don't disagree with you, Shiv. But I didn't have the luxury of rejecting the assumptions on which, the system of which I'm a part, I had to find a way forward for Jaipur. Sarkozy was coming. He was signing this agreement. I'm telling you, facts. I had to find a way. I could not say no to Jaipur. We needed nuclear power, climate change. We needed, we had a huge investment in nuclear energy. I'm just giving you an example. So, I do not have, I'm part of the system, okay? Therefore, I'm part of the problem. I do not have the luxury of being an anarchist. I cannot say, I'm not willing to say no to biotechnology. But I'm willing to say put a moratorium on BD brinjal. I am not prepared to say after Fukushima, India must abandon nuclear power. But I'm willing to say let's do nuclear power subject to 36 conditions. I agree with you. That's it's not a completely satisfactory position to take. Maybe now that I'm out of power, I might, actually do the thing that you are suggesting. But even so, I think, Shiv, if you look at the growth imperative for India, you will be hard to take positions that are extreme in nature. The Indian reality, and I haven't really spoken about this at length, but let me just take 2 minutes on this. Why should green growth be important for India? This is a question that has often bothered me for a long time. And frankly, when I look back on it, there are 4 reasons why green growth, India must be an exception to the grow now, pay later model. All countries in the world follow the grow now, pay later. America followed this, China has followed this, Brazil has followed this, and India is also following this, grow now, pay later. Let's have 8% growth for 20 years, and we'll worry about chemical contamination, pollution, asthma, cancer 20 years from now. Why should India be different? And this is a very important question that all of us, some youngsters here, I'm sure all of you from the ecological community, we must ask this hard question. Why green growth? Why should India be different other than the fact that we are the land of the Mahatma, who is the patron saint of all environmentalists? What's the first reason? The first reason is demographic. Most countries in the world are facing population declines. India is the only country in the world that is going to add 400 million people in the next 30 years. That is our demographic karma. 400 million people, 1/3 of our population, so virtually, we're going to add in the next 30 years. Now, if your population is declining, you can maintain the current standards of consumption. But if you're going to add 400 million people, you've got to not only worry about your consumption, but you're also going to worry about what prospects you're going to leave behind for future generations. Are you jeopardizing their growth prospects? India is the only country in the world. We are adding 10 million people every year to our labor force. 10 million. No country in the world. The United States and UK would also have population decline had there been no immigration from India. It's the immigrants from India who are keeping up their growth rates, birth rates up. Of course, India, Bangladesh and Pakistan also. So the demographic reason is number one. Second, there is a climate change reason. There is no country in the world which is more sensitive, more vulnerable to climate change than India. But none of us recognize it. We all think that climate change is some Western plot to keep us poor. Our dependence on the monsoon, our dependence on the glaciers, our dependence, 300 million people living in coastal areas, vulnerable to increase in mean sea levels. And the fact that all our natural resources are in our forests. Third, today environment has become a public health issue. It's no longer an environmental upper middle class elitist urban pastime. It's a public health concern. Look at the incidence of asthma in children in Bangalore. Documented studies. Look at chemical contamination of our rivers, Ganga and Yamuna. The disposal of toxic waste, municipal sewage, has led to very serious deleterious public health concerns. And fourthly, and you recognize this more than anybody of us, in India, environmentalism is not a lifestyle issue, it's a livelihood issue. 250 million tribals depend on forests for their livelihood. It's a livelihood issue. So when people are agitating, we may be calling it environmental in nature, but they're actually, what are they agitating for? Water rights, forest rights, land rights, they're bread and butter issues. So green growth for us is not some luxury, it's something that has to be fundamental to us. And I think part of our failure is that today, in this current environment of growth and technology triumphalism that you see in the media and in the political discourse, I'm afraid the prospects for sustainable growth are now going to take a backseat. People are going to say, well, let's grow and then we'll worry about sustainability later and so on and so forth. So the challenge for the scientific community and the challenge for the civil society and larger public, including media, is to reinforce this message of why green growth is important. Now, Rajendra Singh, I'll give you an example. 3 साल पहले इन्होंने एक आंदोलन शुरू की थी कि अलकनंदा पर जो बांध बन रहे थे उसको आप खत्म करो. Government had spent 4,000 crores already building dams. And he started an agitation saying that there's no water in the river anymore if you're going to build dams indiscriminately the way you have been doing. And you know what we did? We stopped those dams. We stopped 3 projects. Everybody was furious, but we actually stopped the construction of those dams because we said it is more important to have water in our rivers rather than generate some 1,000 megawatts of power, which we can find somehow. So these types of choices are going to be important, but the type of choice that you are asking me to make, which is reject the green revolution, the poster that Deepak Pentel showed us, reject the green revolution, reject private transport. I mean, these are, I think, fundamentalism that nobody will buy in today's context. That's my response to you. Yeah, Deepak.
First of all, I don't think you to be a villain for rejecting BT Brinjal. I wanted to make that clear. But I would say that there are some mistakes have been made, and I would just like to point them out in a minute. When you realized that there is so much opposition, and this brinjal is really not that important for India's food security, then what was the great fun in bringing the whole science of biotechnology in disrepute by going to urban centers, opening it to these die-hard people who don't want to understand? We can make out of genetic engineering later on. And I think, secondly, when you said that you wanted an independent regulatory body, who had objected to it? The government of such bright people, we did not take it through the bribe bill. We let it lapse. So, I mean, the political class is there to lead. And I fully agree with you that we should question, we should be skeptical. This is the way science has moved on. I fully agree that technology deserves some questions. What is the relevant technology and so on. But a technology which could be a game changer for India's 47% population, and you talked about demographic dividend or disaster, whichever way one wants to see it. The fact is that today 47% of India's population is on agriculture. And in 2023, we will be 42%. The actual number will be little more than what it is today. So who is going to improve the farm incomes? Where from the increase in farm incomes will come? Only through low input, high output agriculture, and genetic engineering is one of the techniques. I would not say that it is all encompassing some godly act which will make us. So why didn't we take the bribe bill through? Why did some grandstanding within the ministries, and why we didn't develop a cogent framework to say, look, this is no good, we move to the next one. And I want to inform you that for 1.5 years the GAC has not been meeting. Now that shows, apathy towards things. It is not hastened slowly. Something should have been cleared, and if nothing was worthwhile India, everything should have been rejected. Now that would have been like an acting government. Or rather it looked like the ministries are at one another's throat. We don't know where we are navigating, and we are doing it for the purpose of pleasing, and even the tech committee, I must inform you, this was made in such a way that only the skeptics and who were comfortable with hasten slowly, and Dr. M.S. Swaminathan belongs to that category of scientists who believes in hasten slowly. This may be great wisdom, but I don't think this is the way to provide leadership from the political class.
No, you see, I'm sensitive to your point of view, because had we hastened slowly, the first green revolution wouldn't have taken place. The first green revolution took place because we didn't hasten slowly. We just went ahead and imported 18,000 tons of seed from Mexico and from Philippines, and we got the first green revolution going. But I think the difference between the first green revolution and the BT Brinjal case, you yourself brought out. The first green revolution was entirely in the public domain. The seeds were available from CIMIT and IRRI. The seeds came to IARI. Entirely in the public domain. But now we are not talking of public domain science any longer. We are talking of private science. We are talking of highly oligopolistic science, if not monopolistic, highly oligopolistic science. And that's what has created a lot of fears. I agree with you that if by this decision India is going to abandon biotechnology in agriculture, then certainly Mark Antony is proved right. The good is oft interred with their bones, the evil that men do lives after them, The evil that ministers do lives after them. I agree. If that is going to happen, but I hope that's not going to happen. Because time in and time again, I kept saying it's not biotech, it's not BT, general, it's BT Brinjal case. And use the BT Brinjal case. Now, why didn't we come up with a regulator? I don't know. No, ask me. It shouldn't take long for Parliament to pass. Why was this consensus not created with state governments? I don't know. And Deepak, you'll be surprised. State after state, irrespective of political party, Congress state, BJP state, Left Front state, BJD state, Karunanidhi followed by Jayalalitha. They never agree on anything, but on this they agreed. So state after state. Sir?
Is it actually bad communication by the...
No. See, I think, frankly, it was a complete communication disaster. Complete communication disaster from day one. Complete communication disaster for day one. And people sort of, and also I'll tell you something. With all due respects to all the scientists present here, when scientists retire, they get a different point of view than when they are in active service. Scientists become more society friendly after retirement than when they are in retirement. But this is not true only of scientists. It is true of civil servants also. I agree with you. Civil servants also become very friendly towards public and civil society activists after they retire. Actually, civil servants 1 year before their retirement, to prepare for the transition, they become more enlightened, and they reach full enlightenment after their retirement. So scientists are no exception to that. But I agree with you, it's a complete communication disaster. Complete communication. Sorry, I can't hear you, Mr. Pasarthi.
Now, as a minister at the time, were you not worried? Why is it that all the state governments are against it?
Yes, I was completely flabbergasted.
Did you do anything
And let me tell you worse. Let me tell you, Mr. Parsarthi, if you read the BT dossier decision on the website, every state government had an agricultural scientist giving the point of view to that state government. You know, Lord Keynes once said, a very famous quotation of Lord Keynes, that people in public life who think that they are free from the stranglehold of ideas are usually prisoners of some defunct economist. That quotation came to my mind, because every state government had some retired Magsaysay award, some award, this award guy giving them the advice. It's amazing. Not one state government said, go ahead. Had one state government said, even Punjab. It was shocking to me, Punjab, Haryana.
Jairam, I want you to look at that direction.
Yeah, please, yeah.
They are not the scientists, they are not yet retired. And so, are there any questions from that side? You agree with him or disagree with him?
I'm a PhD student at the National Center for Biological Sciences. My name is Umesh Srinivasan. I was just wondering, very often the media is what is the interface between civil society and the scientific community. And if you read a scientific paper, for example, it always comes with hedges and caveats and context-specific things that say that this might be applicable to particular situations, it might not be applicable elsewhere, and so on. But the nature of media, especially TV media, where the nuances and the context are not brought out. I mean, what are the principles that you would draw? You've drawn principles for civil society, you've drawn principles for the scientific community. What are the principles you would draw for the media in terms of communicating science to civil society and vice versa?
Very good point. I think what you need to do, and this point came out in the discussion earlier, you don't depend on interlocutors. You must have direct contact between the scientific community and the constituency that you are engaged with. Do not depend on the media, because the media is driven increasingly by a different cycle than what the scientists want and what maybe the people want. So I think it's important for the scientific community, and let me give you an example of what I'm saying here. And I'll take the example of a professor from this institute, a retired professor, Madhav Gadgil, and how he handled the Western Ghats report. He didn't depend on the media. He did direct interaction, which, to use an ugly phrase, but a true phrase, with different stakeholders, And he communicated directly. Of course, Madhav's great advantage, which very few scientists have, is the ability to communicate in non-English languages, He communicates beautifully in Kannada, he communicates beautifully in Marathi, he communicates in Hindi. And he's not a typical scientist. He wears khadi. Scientists are all guys who come in suit, boot, and all those things. He looks a person whom you can trust. You can relate to. So the media, many people think the media is the interface. I would not trust that interface in today's day and age. I would strongly plead for direct interactions. If it is Jaitapur, between NPCIL and locally elected bodies, locally elected institutions, local organizations, local civil society organizations. And very often I find that the agreement that can be reached is far more probable when the media is absent. Because when the media is present, grandstanding takes place. From both sides, The scientists want to prove something and civil society wants to prove something else. But this is not to say that we have to make an investment in upgrading the level of skills of the media. I mean, you were not here in the morning, but there was a discussion, Pallav Bagla took us through how scientists communicating has come down, but science communication also has come down. Both of them have come down. Over the years, you do not have a critical mass of people who are communicating complex scientific issues in languages that people can understand. The number of people can be counted. And therefore, I think science communication is an investment, is an externality, is an investment that we must make. I don't know how many institutions run specialized programs for science communicators, I'm sorry that most scientific organizations I'm aware of think science communication as drafting a press release and releasing it, And that's not science communication. Science communication is actually engaging the media, educating the media, explaining to the media what it's all about, and also be prepared for some hostility and some skepticism from the media. Let's take an extreme example. Baldev Rajji takes a media team to Kalpakam, right? To show what a great job we have done on our fast breeder reactor. And we have done a fantastic job. Not many people know about it, but suppose he takes a media team. I can bet you, if he takes 10 people, there'll be 4 people who will not write on the fast breeder. They will write about the increase in cancer incidence of the people living around Kalpakam. And immediately he will get angry and he will say, media ko jare do. And this has happened. I'm giving you a concrete example. This has actually happened. People have not written positive things about Kalpakam, and they have said about how people living around Kalpakam have actually become more cancer prone, how people living in Tarapur have become more cancer prone, and so on. So the scientific community has to be prepared for some backlash when there is openness. When you let sunlight in, not everything is going to be hunky-dory. There will be some criticism. There will be some degree of questioning which our scientific community must be prepared to accept. I'm not sure that our scientific community is actually prepared to accept that degree of openness. Yes, sir.
Sir, I'm Ashish Navneet. I'm a PhD research scholar working on policy and politics of genetically modified crops in India. My simple question to you is that within government, Ministries of Agriculture and Ministry of Environment and Forest, aren't they failing to generate consensus among themselves? Is there some kind of influence, some kind of different influences within Ministry of Agriculture and Ministry of Environment and Forest? So why they are coming with different opinions? Why they can't form common consensus?
I disagree with your premise of your question. The job of the Ministry of Agriculture is to promote genetic engineering or, low input, high output technology, of which genetic engineering is one. The job of the Ministry of Environment and Forests is to do its due diligence on the application of this technology. The job of the government is to create the consensus. If Ministry of Environment is going to create a consensus, then it becomes a Thappa ministry, no? So I take a different view. My view is that every person has to fulfill his or her dharma. The mandate of the Ministry of Environment and Forests is to protect India's natural resources, protect livelihoods, ensure sustainability, not to promote genetic engineering. But the mandate of the Ministry of Agriculture is to increase agricultural output, of which genetic engineering is one technology. Now, the job of the government as a collective is to create this consensus. Consensus is different from unanimity. Please mark my words. We can never have unanimity in these views, but we can have a consensus. Consensus means, आपको सुन लिया, मेरी बात भी हो गई है, ठीक है, ये करना है. That is consensus. Unanimity is, no, it's my view, it's my way or the highway. That is not possible in government. So, what is lacking in India is forums which create this type of consensus, which are durable. Sometimes they get done through strong arm tactics, sometimes they get done through debate and discussion, sometimes they get done from outside government, but please do not fall into this trap of thinking that all ministries must be monochromatic, that all of them must sing the same tune, that all of them must say genetic engineering wah wah, BT Brinjal wah wah. No. That's not the way I feel democracies function. Democracies function best where each one articulates their mandate's view, and then as a collective we are able to come out with a consensus. Yes, at the lady at the back, the extreme back. Yeah.
I'm Kavita Kuruganti, one of the people who's been involved in the BT Brinjal campaign. I can see him holding his head. I had a couple of things to say. One is that your whole presentation is somehow devoid of a political economy framework, which once again is something that says science and tech for growth is what we should be discussing about, not science and tech for sustainability, science and tech for social and environmental justice, science and tech for plurality, science and tech for you name it, different kinds of justices that are missing out there today. Maybe because you're speaking with a group of public sector scientists from the names that I gathered while standing here, maybe it seems like the correct sort of thing to discuss. But in a policy setting which favors only growth, in a policy setting where every space is left to the private sector, how do you expect various other kinds of investments to take place? Coming from the field of agriculture, I would like to know who would invest in agroecology. It will not add to the GDP because people will not buy things in dabbas. Pesticides will not be bought, fertilizers will not be bought, maybe they'll use nature's processes. It won't add to the GDP. Maybe people will not fall sick and maybe hospitals won't run. It will not add to the GDP. What do we do in terms of some of the real solutions that don't get adequate resources from governments that don't think about actual plurality, where we see a situation where particular technologies are favored than particular other technologies? How do we explain this?
Kavita, I'm a prisoner of the system. I told you right at the beginning. I'm not questioning the assumption of growth. I'm not questioning the paradigm of growth. I'm not questioning the model of economic growth. All I'm pleading for is that recognizing the growth imperative, how do you maximize ecological benefits? How do you maximize public confidence in that growth process? And how do you minimize the pains of that growth process, whether it is land acquisition, whether it is deforestation, or whether it is pollution? So I'm not questioning the premise of this energy-intensive, resource-intensive model. I'm not, because I'm not a romantic and I'm not an anarchist. I'm a realist. You have to find jobs for 10 million youth who are entering the labor force every year. You have to generate 60, 70,000 megawatts of power every year to meet energy demand. So, these are all givens. You need water, you need, I don't have to spell it out for you. So, you can either go, the Schumacher route and question the entire model of growth. I know some of you might want to do it. But I think had Gandhi lived today, Gandhi would not have, Gandhi may have had a different viewpoint. Hind Swaraj was a product of 1909, was a product of his times. Sorry? You got the dates wrong. 1902. 1904, sorry, 1904. It was made product of 1904. So, I think, the circumstances and the challenges in which we are living force us on a certain growth path. I don't think that electricity is essential, transportation is essential, jobs are essential, low input, high output agriculture. You have to feed people. And to think that India is going to produce 270 million tons of food grains with cow dung and cow urine, I think is romantic to the extreme.
Question. Then don't talk about green growth. It's utterly hypocritical.
The
whole argument is coming apart, Jairam. Come on, cut the shit. I think basically at one level now you're caught in the same polarities which you accuse your opponents of. We're not talking about cow dung. And you better get the history of Schumacher right. You work with Joan Maynard Keynes from coal.
So what is the way out?
The way out is you put back what you said. Because the minute a question is asked, you talk beautifully of green growth, and then you say, I'm a realist, as if you're competing with Monte Calvaria.
You know, I have often said, Shiv has to be heard, he has to be read, but not believed. But
Jairam sir, excuse me. Jairam sir.
Where are you? Yeah, please.
सर एक जमाना था गंगा स्नानम तुंगा पानम बोल के, उतना पवित्र नदी आज स्नान किया तो स्किन डिसीज आ रहा है। ये नौबत आने के लिए कौन रेस्पॉन्सिबल है?
हम लोग हैं।
नहीं,
आप और हम हैं। सरकार को जिम्मेदार मत ठहराइए। हाँ, सरकार को जिम्मेदार मत ठहराइए। आप और हम जो गंगा में प्लास्टिक डालते हैं, गंगा में मलबा फेंकते हैं, गंगा में अनट्रीटेड सुवेज जाने देते हैं, गंगा में हाफ जले हुए शरीर को डालते हैं, ये हम, आप और हम जिम्मेदार हैं गंगा के लिए। और गंगा में जो हुआ है और यमुना में जो हो रहा है वो बहुत भयानक है। और मैंने खुद कोशिश की है पिछले 3-3.5 साल से, 4 साल से, कि उस पर कुछ किया जाए, पर बहुत मुश्किल है, बहुत मुश्किल है। क्योंकि इन शहरों में तो सुएज का नाम ही नहीं है, सुएज सिस्टम का नाम ही नहीं है। वाराणसी हो या कवाल शहर हैं जो उत्तर प्रदेश में हैं, कन्नौज से लेकर वाराणसी तक 550 किलोमीटर का स्ट्रेच अगर आप देखें, वो जो प्रदूषण आपको देखने को मिलता है, रासायनिक प्रदूषण, और जो सुएज जाता है, म्यूनिसिपल सुएज जाता है, और इंडस्ट्री की वजह से, खास तौर से चमड़े के इंडस्ट्री से जो टेनरी के एफ्लुएंट जाते हैं वहाँ, तो ये आप और हम जिम्मेदार हैं और हमें कुछ करना चाहिए इस पर। यही तो सब लोग कहते हैं करना चाहिए, पर हो नहीं रहा। Yes, Prabir.
Jairam, you have to accept that is government's responsibility. And there are...
Which responsibility? Sorry?
Government's responsibility.
For?
If effluent
for
treatment, etc. And we have laws for that, which you have not implemented. But let's leave that aside. I think between green growth and green capitalism, we must also be clear that I suspect that when you say green growth, you're really saying green capitalism. And it's in that sense, it's capitalism of the human face, or neoliberal economy of the human face. If that becomes the issue, then we really have problems. But I must say that you have given a brilliant speech, and I do appreciate the fact that the scientific community in this country is not used to speaking to the people. And the whole tradition of people's education in science, public communication of science, how to bring it back is a big challenge for us. Otherwise, we will have a one-sided debate in which the scientists are going to lose and lose badly.
No, let me start with your last comment. The scientists are losing the plot. They're losing the plot on nuclear. They're losing the plot on genetic engineering. They're losing the game on a whole variety of technical issues, because apart from the fact, the civil society is well organized, some of them get funding and all that. The real issue is what you put your finger on. The unwillingness and the inability of the scientific community to come out, engage, not just communicate, engage. I find that to be the single greatest weakness.
There are this whole issue of foreign funding of NGOs, while this is becoming a big issue. Now the question is, Monsanto is here, Ariba is here, we have an Enron over here. They did a lot of public education within quotes.
Yeah.
So don't blame Greenpeace if you bring in all the others. Don't blame the opposition to Walmart if you bring in Walmart.
Let me tell you an interesting story about Greenpeace that has not come out. Okay. You wanted me to speak frankly. Let me tell you a story about Greenpeace that had not come out. A file came to me in February 2010 on Dhamra port in Odisha, saying that Dhamra port, which was being built by Tatas, in fact, owners of this auditorium, no doubt, or builders of this auditorium, this was actually forest land. They did not get forest clearance. And this would lead to a massive, massive destruction of olive ridley turtles. Okay? So I did my due diligence, got all the files, got all the paperwork, talked to all the officers, went to Dhamra, did a field visit. I came back and I recorded a 2-page note why Dhamra should get the clearance. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Greenpeace got hold of that through RTI. No problem, I have no hassle. They asked for it and I gave it. And before I know anything, there's an advertisement in all the newspapers of India, including Times of India, Hindu, Indian Express, Hindustan, you name it, reproducing my note and saying that I am an agent of the Tatas, that I've taken money from the Tatas to clear the Dhamra port. Now, the accusation against me is that I have reduced GDP growth by 2.5 percentage points. Nobody has accused me of taking money from the Tatas. Greenpeace is the first organization to accuse me of clearing a project. Normally the accusation against me is not clearing a project. This was an occasion in which they went to town saying that I actually cleared a project. Now, having said this, on BT Brinjal, they made my life miserable. Even though my final product turned out to their satisfaction, during the process, they would sit outside my house, they would bombard my email address, fill up my inbox with memorandum from all over the world. It made my life miserable. So I've had a particularly rocky relationship with Greenpeace. But let me say this for the record, publicly. I disagree with putting any form of restrictions on Greenpeace. I disagree with what they have said. I don't find their methods also agreeable at times. But you cannot choke off dissent like this. Yeah, these are people. They are raising issues, and government must have the courage and the integrity to address those issues. They used one of my reports on the Mahan coal field to raise issues, and SR has filed a defamation case against them. I would defend Greenpeace on that. So I don't think that we should reduce the great danger. I feel the great danger in the next couple of years is that the room for dissent will shrink. The tolerance for different points of view will shrink. The growth mania will be accompanied by envirophobia. That 8% growth, let's grow now, pay later type of a syndrome. I find that to be very dangerous. And I think that is what we have to ward against. And I will speak up for Greenpeace publicly. I have already spoken up publicly, saying you cannot do this. No government should do this. We should allow protests. We should allow organizations to, to have different points of view. And if it means delays in projects, so be it. But this type of fundamentalism that we will ride roughshod over all forms of protests and agitation, I think will not do justice to the growth process, and will certainly not make the growth sustainable socially.
Question on Greenpeace was Pallav. My question on Greenpeace was asked by Praveen. My second question to you is, Mr. Modi seems to be following a lot of what you have said. Are you enamored by...
He's following what? Sorry?
A lot of what you used to say as the environment minister, Mr. Modi seems to be following very closely in your footsteps. Are you enamored and in love with him now?
Mr. Modi, see, in public life you cannot take intellectual property rights on ideas, or on words. So there are many words I may have used which others have used. But yes, when I first said in India that Indian women have more mobile phones than toilets, women's organizations jumped on me. When I said that in India toilets are more important than temples, VHP and RSS came and urinated outside my house. But when Narendra Modi said, शौचालय देवालयों से भी ज़्यादा महत्व रखते हैं, everybody clapped. So, big deal, yeah. I mean, he's recognized the value, all power to him. And I hope something comes out of it. On environment, I am not sure, by the way. On environment, I am not sure. He says that environment should be integrated with growth. But in actual practice, if that integration means making choices, which means no dam on the Ganga, or which means no coal mine near a tiger reserve, then I'm not sure that Mr. Modi will follow what I would recommend. So I'm not sure. And thirdly, the difference between him and me is I'm far more comfortable with Greenpeace than he will ever be. I'm far more comfortable with the Kavita Kurugantis. Kavita, for I don't know how many years, she's been arguing with me. We disagree on most things. But, we have a most agreeable relationship, yeah. I don't think Mr. Modi is capable of that. So,
The Intelligence Bureau report, which we are talking about today, came out at the time when your government was in power and Mr. Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister. I have a copy of that, please. And Mr. Manmohan Singh himself gave in the interview very sharply against whatever is being said. So it seems to be going across government. So I don't think Mr. Modi should be blamed for that. It's equally, if the blame has to go, it has to go to both UPA and to NDA for not wanting dissent.
Intelligence Bureau is a contradiction in terms, it's an oxymoron. It's like military intelligence, they don't go together. The amount of intelligence that is shown in this report indulges not in casual empiricism, but spurious empiricism. There is empiricism of a casual variety, but there is empiricism of a spurious and a bogus variety when it says that India's GDP has been reduced by 2 to 3 percentage points. First of all, I don't know whether it's 2 to 3% or 2 to 3 percentage points. There's a fundamental difference between the two, which will go beyond the IB capability to comprehend. But they say that India's GDP has come down because of 2 to 3 percentage because of environmental activism. How do you get this estimate? Who has done this estimate? Where is the data? Why is it not in the public domain? Why is it not peer reviewed? This is another Himalayan glacier type of a bogus statement, So but if the IB has done some path-breaking econometric analysis, let it be out in the public domain and let it be debated. But you cannot, on the basis of innuendo and insinuation, say that Indian environmental activism has reduced India's GDP by 2 to 3 percentage points. It's bogus, yeah. It's bizarre and bogus.
I just don't want to join issue with you. I was in the first environmental MEF committee for nuclear projects. When one of the power projects were considered, they have put 40 conditions, not 36. And some of them were, very loose. Okay? Again, as you said, now the way it was put, okay, let us have more conditions added. And I was responsible for putting one condition, a very innocuous condition, that in addition to the MEF conditions, AERB conditions also should be fulfilled. So I'm sorry, you need not take credit for putting 36 conditions in the case of Jaitapur, because 15 years ago, probably 1987 or 86, when the first environmental MOEF committee worked on, they have already put 40 conditions. Now, I didn't look at these conditions, your conditions and their conditions, So you're not escaping by putting conditions. That's not what I was telling.
Yeah. Conditions is what Shiv would call a cop-out, it's a cop-out in a way. But if you, I should look at this. You've given me an interesting thought. I'll get back to you. I'll compare those 40 conditions with these 36 conditions. These 36 conditions were, we tried to make it as site-specific as possible. And I suspect, I might be wrong, Mr. Parsarthi, but in the 2010 conditions would have more to do with people's, ordinary people's concerns about resettlement, rehabilitation, acquisition of lands, rise in temperatures and loss of livelihood because of fishing, those types of issues. So I suspect there is some difference between the two, but I'll check on this and I'll get back to you.
I don't want to go into the Jaitapur issue because a lot has been discussed.
just want to make one statement that you made regarding the expectation that how much would be the nuclear contribution. And you said that for many years we have been listening to that kind of a, but there is, I think, a kind of a wrong perception on this, because the government, I would say, has never committed to install, celebrate, let us take 10,000 megawatt by 2000. Since 10,000 megawatt by 2000 is a PowerPoint presentation by one of the chairmen earlier, that's all. Because it has never been a sanctioned project. It's not a government policy. So if the government investment, in this case it's only government investment, if the government investment is not there, there's no way you can get that done. So this, I think, is that there's a failing of the department, I think is a wrong notion. Actually, whatever has been committed by the government in form of a sanctioned project, I think not a single one where one can say that there has been a failure.
Well, you know, Dr. Banerjee, my first job in government was in the Advisory Board on Energy. And one of the first things I sat through in that was a presentation by Dr. Ramana and Dr. Srinivasan, who made a perspective plan for nuclear energy by the year 2000, 10,000 megawatts by the year 2000. It's stuck in my mind, you know. And I mean, that was not government policy, I agree with you. It was a perspective prepared. Then it became 10,000 megawatts by 2010. Then it became 10,000 megawatts by 2020. Listen, you're talking to somebody who's your friend, your supporter. But I'm just telling you what the people are saying, the credibility of the system.
No, this is where actually, this is a kind of a wrong notion. This is there in practical communication, Dr. In many minds this is there. You see, the technically, because I'm not talking about sustainability. If today we talk of sustainability involving thorium, immediately the question will be that thorium we have been listening from Homi Bhabha's time.
Yeah.
So why thorium is not in action today? Now this has a technical bearing. It's nothing to do with whether Bhabha has told or not. It essentially depends on whether you have installed several fast reactors or not. So it has nothing to do, but this is, in fact, you came a little late for I was trying to explain these things in very specific points. And same way, like as you mentioned about the cancer cases around, so I have given exact data surveying over 150,000 people. So that's why there are perception, you go around, it's like where you get the maximum deformities, around the places of worship. So you won't associate these deformities of a people with the shrine. It's the same kind of a logic.
It's a very interesting analogy.
But
a simple one point I'd like to make. That, you know, one of the reasons that a nuclear program also got into problems was uranium mining. Funds were cut. And the two people who were responsible for cutting that was Finance Minister Manmohan Singh and Montek Singh Ahluwalia, the Finance Secretary at that time. Later, see, the issue is that, see, we really pay a very heavy price for uranium in our country because we are having an ore which is as low as 0.04 to 0.03% uranium containing. This is not considered to be an economically exploitable material. But Homi Bhabha decided way back to open a mine in 1966. But you see the wisdom of that. Only because of that, the independence that India has in the overall nuclear activity is only because of that. Otherwise, we would have been perennially dependent on import of uranium. So there are issues of this kind. So it requires one-to-one discussion.
Sure.
So I again compliment Dr. Ramurthy and Pallab for making this kind of, even in a small number, I think we could exchange many of these views.
Yes, Dr. Ramurthy. Have we reached the...
All good things in life come to an end sometime or other. So I think the right time to... Okay, last
I tried, but not many takers for that. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's gone to Godrej, yeah, so it's the same thing. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Jairam Ramesh.